I see you, King. The mantra was unceasing, an inner voice coming from seemingly out of nowhere, yet finding its home everywhere, permeating every corner of my existence, ringing through my entire being, cutting like a sharp knife through a cloud of rapidly flowing thoughts. Thoughts of isolation, thoughts of despair, thoughts of rage, thoughts of victimhood, all being cut down at their existential roots by this mantra that seemed to grow stronger with each subsequent utterance. The voice chanting it was both foreign and familiar, timeless, intimate, unconditionally accepting, wielding a gentle power as every bit compassionate as it was uncompromising in its declaration. I see you, King. Rippling up and down the cosmic highway, leading me back to my source as I trotted up and down the empty hallways of Montreal's finest stroke ward. I see you, King, now deafening against the silent backdrop. My partner Sue had left for the evening. The graveyard crew of night nurses were all tucked away in their little enclaves, leaving me with a vast silence that was both deeply unsettling, yet the perfect backdrop for the soul-deep shifts ready to be fully seen and heard. The subterranean rumblings which had gone long ignored could no longer be drowned out by the incessant sound of busyness or the resigned whimpers of the toothless victim. I see you, King. This was February 1st, 2015. Half the world was still tuned into Super Bowl 49. Malcolm Butler just picked off Russell Wilson to give the Pats another ring. Meanwhile, I was 29 years old and just 3 days removed from the stroke that left me temporarily paralyzed down the entire left side of my body. An inevitable climax to what had been a winter of discontent, one in which my own authentic longings were shamelessly sold off to the highest bidder, where my decisions were increasingly shaped by fear and constraint rather than unbridled love and expansion. $20 per hour and an unlimited Starbucks card was all it took to pry me away from my dream business and the screenplay begging to be written through me. I auctioned off my keyboard, liquidated my spirit, and spent 60-hour work weeks feeding the dreams of others while forcing my own into deathly starvation. I felt ashamed by my lack of self-authorship. I couldn't bear to look at my own cowardice. Most of all, I was quickly losing faith in the ineffable someday in which all our most prized dreams and expressions get stored. They seemed destined to rot away in the lockbox, decomposing at the same rate at which I dismissed and denied my responsibility to bridge them into creation. I mourned their loss while bitterly condemning my own complicitness in their destruction. No, I may not have been the one swinging the sledgehammer against the fragile contours of my soul, but I certainly wasn't stepping in to defend it either. Instead, I was frantically slapping on the brakes to my own evolution, extinguishing the spark of creation which begged to be lit into fiery existence, giving the life that flowed through me the ultimate fuck you. And in the sudden clotting of my right cerebral artery, life finally obliged, taking one step out the door while looking back at me with a glint of violent catharsis in her eye. I remember that moment so vividly, just waking up on the couch, suddenly unable to connect intention with bodily action. Face frozen shut, limbs dangling off my lifeless body. My first thought, how do I get Sue's attention in the least traumatic way possible? The guttural cries that barely squeaked out the corner of my lips surely failed that first test. My next thought, relief. Not regret, not terror, not sadness, just sheer fucking relief. I didn't long for life to return. Instead, I welcomed my predicament, seeing it as a socially acceptable escape plan for all the secondhand expectations and pressures and responsibilities that I had lacked the courage to break free from myself. The pressures of fulfilling my purpose, the pressures of rising above what seemed to be a rigged game of modern manhood with all its shifting goalposts and the feeling of inner castration with each inevitable miss. the pressures of being the perfect partner, provider, or parent, and the impossible standards that defined each. These roles were becoming more and more suffocating by the day, each one a brightly colored noose that would coil itself around my neck from the moment I woke up to the moment my sedative du jour crossed the brain-blood barrier. There was seemingly no respite. I had long waited to opt out of them all, and I finally got my wish. Incapacitation was the ultimate infantile fantasy, and on that shitty beige couch, it had finally come real. The life of a cripple would exclude me from having to make the tough decisions or to claim sovereignty over my life. It would provide a false cover from the sharp arrows of self-authorship and provide an inarguable built-in excuse for the lack of meaning or impact I had created in my life. It was a timely alibi, letting me off the hook for the death of my dreams while sparing me from being drafted into the front lines of my own existential war. Here it was, a shitty peace treaty signed in blood and sealed by death's cold stamp. The inner victim had finally won, and as he danced atop the bloodied corpse of all I thought I was and all I dreamt myself of becoming, a great silence arose. The quiet desperation I had been experiencing for years simply became quiet. And from this sea of infinite blackness, a bonfire from deep within my belly was lit. The victim's victory dance suddenly ceased. The victim himself vaporizing back into nothingness under the intense heat of this inner flame, and a faint call from deep within the fire first made itself heard. I see you, King. It wasn't just a passive permission to rise as the inner king and claim my throne as the highest version of myself. It was a fiery, life-affirming battle cry, and an invitation to restore life and limb with only one acceptable answer: to stop chasing the limply dangled carrot of my own ever-expanding potential, or collapsing around my preconceived idea of who or what I am or should be, but to instead merge with the infinite, dimensionless, immeasurably powerful aspect of myself and allow all actions to spontaneously emerge from this place. It was an invitation to either rise as the king or to die as the wounded pawn. And I'd say that this was where the inner king was born, but that would be untrue. For this was simply the cataclysmic event where the king was first revealed. Not as some far-reaching mystical delusion, but as a deeply embedded archetype whose qualities became my qualities with each self-renewing, life-affirming heartbeat, each one echoing a new timeless lesson. My higher self wasn't sitting perched in some unreachable neverland, but was actually buried deep within my own body, taking up residence in my belly and my heart. And in this brief moment of ego death and bodily paralysis, he finally rose from his closed-off cavernous dwelling and grabbed the reins of my being. He brokered a sacred pact with life herself, like old lovers tangling up in a timeless romance with resurrection and rebirth as the reward. I see you, King. Each reverberation like dynamite blasting through a thick plate of stubborn bedrock, clearing the rubble and revealing a new, undiscovered layer of self. I see you, King, smashing against the shores of my perception like the powerful but gentle cry of a father waking his son up from a terrible nightmare. I see you, King, the transmutation of rage to love. I see you, King, the death of the victim, the rise of the warrior. I see you, King, the voice of infinite compassion and unconditional self-acceptance. I see you, King, the instant recognition of pure potentiality ready to be breathed into life in every moment. I see you, King, a death, a rebirth with each heartbeat. I see you, King, a surrender emerging, a love of the deep unknown. I see you, King. And with the twitch of a finger, the king again rose. It became clear in that moment that we don't grow into our bigness, we release into it. We become receptive to let it flow through us. We become a willing vessel, even if it takes a moment of crisis or unrestrained catharsis to ferry us over to the shores of this most sacred surrender. No, death isn't what's at stake. It's often the entry point. Now, not bodily death or biological annihilation, but laying to rest the ideas, identities, and beliefs that keep you from experiencing the freedom that you already are. We are never as strong as we think, but we're always stronger than we know. And the King is always there, ever present, reminding us of that strength and calling us to put down the beggar's bowl and reclaim our throne, reminding you of your power, even amidst paralyzing fear and uncertainty, honoring your fullness even within the throes of shame and regret, holding you up in deep reverence even as you scrape the depths of isolation and despair. It's a full, unconditional embrace. For what's a king if he can't hold the complete spectrum of human experience and respond with conviction, compassion, and uncompromising power? Majesty is often found in the muck and the mire, and the crown bestowed upon he who's willing to dive headlong into the darkness to recover it. For beyond the unceasing suffering, beyond the silent struggle, beyond the regrets of yesterday or the fears of tomorrow, you are a king. You are welcome here. It is your birthright to rise, and it's in that spirit that I say, I see you.